I was sitting on my front porch in Phoenix, Arizona, drinking my morning coffee when I saw her marching up my driveway like she owned the place, clipboard in hand and that signature pinched expression that screamed trouble. My 1969 Ford F100 was parked exactly where it had been for the past 3 months, right there in my driveway, minding its own business. And apparently that was a problem for Patricia Henderson, the newly elected president of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. "Mr. Sullivan!" she called out before she even reached my steps, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to discuss your vehicle situation immediately." I set down my coffee and leaned back in my chair, already knowing this was going to be one of those conversations. "Morning, Patricia. What vehicle situation would that be?" She stopped at the bottom of my porch steps, her perfectly manicured finger pointing accusingly at my truck. "That Eyesore you call a vehicle is in direct violation of our community standards. Section 12, paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that all vehicles must be maintained in presentable condition and cannot detract from the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood." I looked over at my truck, the primer gray paint job that I had been carefully applying piece by piece, the slight rust showing through in spots, the missing chrome trim on the passenger side. To most people, it probably did look like a project truck that had seen better days. What Patricia did not know, what nobody in this pristine cookie-cutter subdivision knew, was that my old Ford was worth more than most of the brand-new SUVs sitting in these driveways. "It is presentable," I said calmly. "It is clean, it runs, and it is parked legally on my own property." Patricia's nostrils flared. "Mr. Sullivan, I have received multiple complaints from your neighbors about this vehicle. It looks like something you dragged out of a junkyard. This is a respectable community with property values to maintain. I'm giving you 14 days to remove it from the premises or face daily fines of $50. I felt my jaw tighten. I had lived in this house for 5 years, paid my HOA dues on time every single month, never caused any problems, kept my lawn trimmed to their ridiculous specifications. And now, this woman, who had moved into the neighborhood 8 months ago and immediately ran for HOA president like it was her calling in life, was telling me what I could park in my own driveway. "You cannot fine me for parking my truck on my property," I said, keeping my voice level. "I have reviewed the bylaws, Patricia. Nowhere does it say that a vehicle in good working order cannot be parked in a resident's driveway." She pulled out a piece of paper from her clipboard and thrust it toward me. "This is an official notice of violation. You have 14 days. After that, the fines begin, and if you continue to refuse compliance, we will pursue legal action to force removal and potentially place a lien on your property." I took the paper, scanning the formal language that basically repeated everything she had just said. At the bottom was her signature, along with 2 other HOA board members I recognized, Linda Carmichael and Robert Preston. "I will be contesting this," I said. "That's your right," Patricia replied, her tone suggesting she thought I would be wasting my time. "The next HOA board meeting is in 3 weeks. You may present your case then, but until a formal decision is made, the violation stands, and the clock is ticking." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, her sensible flats clicking against the concrete. I watched her go, then looked back at my truck. My grandfather's truck, actually, the one he had bought brand new in 1969 and babied for 40 years before he passed it down to my father, who had driven it for another 15 before giving it to me 5 years ago. The truck that had been in my family for its entire life, every oil change documented, every repair cataloged. The truck that I had been slowly, methodically restoring to its original glory with period-correct parts that cost a small fortune. I pulled out my phone and dialed my buddy Marcus, who ran a classic car appraisal business in Scottsdale. "Warren, what is up?" Marcus answered on the second ring. "I need a favor," I said. "Remember how you've been bugging me to get my truck officially appraised? The F100? Hell yes, I remember. I've been telling you for 2 years that thing is sitting on a gold mine. You finally ready to get some documentation?" "Yeah," I said, looking at the violation notice in my hand. "Turns out my HOA thinks it is an eyesore. I need ammunition." Marcus laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. "Oh man, they have no idea what they are messing with, do they? I can come by tomorrow if you are free. Bring my camera, get all the documentation sorted out. With the original papers you have got, the condition of that frame, the numbers matching engine." Warren, I am telling you right now, you are looking at serious money. How serious? You really want me to spoil the surprise? Yeah, I really do. I heard him tapping on his computer. Conservative estimate, based on recent auctions of similar vehicles in worse condition, you're sitting on at least $120,000. But with full documentation, original family ownership, that pristine frame, the original paint still visible under the primer. Could easily hit 150, maybe more to the right buyer. The number hit me like a physical thing, even though I had suspected the truck was valuable. Hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. Tomorrow works. Morning, around 10? I will be there. And Warren, document everything with this HOA situation. Every interaction, every piece of paper they give you. These things can get ugly fast. He was not wrong about that. I spent the rest of the day photographing the violation notice, writing down exactly what Patricia had said, noting the time and date of her visit. I also pulled out all the documentation I had on the truck, the original bill of sale from 1969 with my grandfather's signature, every maintenance record, photos of the restoration process, receipts for parts. By the time I finished, I had a folder 2 inches thick. That night, I did some research on HOA litigation in Arizona. What I found was not encouraging. HOAs had broad powers to enforce their rules, and property owners often found themselves in expensive legal battles even when the HOA was clearly overstepping. But I also found cases where homeowners had successfully fought back, especially when the HOA violated its own procedures or acted in bad faith. Marcus showed up the next morning right on time, pulling up in his spotless Mercedes with a camera bag and a laptop case. He was a tall guy in his 50s with gray hair and the kind of enthusiasm for old vehicles that bordered on religious fervor. There she is, he said, walking straight to my truck like it was a long-lost friend. Man, every time I see this beauty, my heart breaks a little that you would not sell her to me. Not happening, I said. This truck is going to my son when I am gone, same as it came to me. Yeah, I know. Marcus was already circling the vehicle, taking photographs from every angle. Pop the hood for me? I grabbed the keys and opened up the hood. The 360 cubic inch V8 sat there, original and numbers matching, the engine bay clean enough to eat off. Marcus let out a low whistle. This is what I am talking about. You just do not see this anymore. Most people who restore these trucks, they swap in modern engines, update everything. But this is pure original automotive history. He spent the next 2 hours going over every inch of the truck, photographing the VIN plates, the frame serial numbers, the engine stamps. He crawled underneath with a flashlight, checking for rust or damage. He cross-referenced the build sheet my grandfather had saved with the actual vehicle specifications. He was thorough in a way that would have been annoying if I was not so grateful for it. Finally, he sat down at my kitchen table with his laptop and started typing up the official appraisal report. I made coffee and waited, watching him work. Okay, he said after about 30 minutes. Official appraisal is done. Warren, I am putting this at $150,000, and that is being conservative. I could justify going higher based on the family provenance alone, but this number will hold up to any scrutiny. He turned the laptop around so I could see the report. It was comprehensive, running to 12 pages with photographs, documentation references, and comparisons to recent sales of similar vehicles. At the bottom was the magic number, $150,000. I am emailing this to you now, Marcus said. PDF format, digitally signed. This is an official appraisal that would hold up in any legal proceeding or insurance claim. You're also going to want to update your insurance, by the way. If something happened to this truck and you only have basic coverage, you would be out a fortune. I will call them today, I said, staring at the number on the screen. $150,000 for a truck that Patricia Henderson thought was junkyard trash. So what is your play here? Marcus asked. You going to wait until the HOA meeting and drop this on them? That is the plan. Let them keep digging their hole for the next few weeks, then present the appraisal and watch them try to backpedal. Marcus grinned. I like it. Just be careful. HOA board members do not like being embarrassed, and people do stupid things when their ego gets bruised. Document everything. He left around noon, and I spent the afternoon updating my insurance policy and making copies of the appraisal report. I also drafted a formal letter to the HOA board stating my intention to contest the violation and requesting a hearing at the next board meeting. The next 2 weeks were quiet. Too quiet. I kept expecting Patricia to show up again or to receive another threatening letter, but nothing came. I should have known she was not done. On day 12 of my 14-day deadline, I came home from work to find a bright orange sticker plastered across my truck's windshield. Violation notice. This vehicle has been deemed in violation of community standards. Removal required within 48 hours or vehicle will be towed at owner's expense. My vision actually went red for a second. They were escalating. Not only were they threatening to tow my truck, but they had put a sticker on it that had probably damaged the glass. I carefully peeled off the sticker, noting the adhesive residue it left behind, and photographed everything. I called Marcus immediately. "They are threatening to tow it." "Can they do that?" he asked. "I do not think so. Not from my private property, but I am calling a lawyer to make sure." The lawyer I contacted, Janet Reeves, specialized in HOA disputes. She squeezed me in for a consultation that same afternoon. "They absolutely cannot tow your vehicle from your private driveway without a court order," she said, after reviewing all my documentation. "That would be theft, plain and simple. What they can do is fine you according to the bylaws and eventually pursue a lien if the fines go unpaid, but even that requires proper legal process." "So the towing threat is just intimidation?" "Exactly. It is a common tactic. They are hoping you will panic and comply rather than fight back." She looked at the appraisal report Marcus had prepared, her eyebrows rising. "This is quite a vehicle you have got here, and you have documented everything perfectly. The HOA is on very shaky ground with this violation. What do you recommend?" "Attend the board meeting, present your case, and make it clear you know your rights. The appraisal alone should make them reconsider, but if they push forward anyway, we can file suit for harassment and potentially for diminution of property value if their actions affect your ability to enjoy your property. But let us hope it does not come to that." I left her office feeling more confident. The board meeting was still a week away, but I was ready. Day 14 came and went. I did not move my truck. That afternoon, I received a certified letter stating that I was now in violation and would be fined $50 per day starting immediately. The letter was signed by Patricia Henderson and included an itemized bill showing I already owed $50. I wrote them a check for $50 with "paid under protest" in the memo line and mailed it back with a copy of my contest letter. If they wanted to play hardball, I would play by the rules and keep every receipt. The daily fines continued. Every morning, there was a new notice on my door, adding another $50 to my supposed debt. I paid each one under protest and documented everything. By the time the board meeting rolled around, I had paid $350 in fines. The HOA board meeting was held in the community center, a bland beige building that matched every other structure in the subdivision. I arrived 15 minutes early with my folder of documentation, the appraisal report, and a calm determination to make my case. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where the board members sat, and rows of chairs for residents. Patricia was in the center seat, flanked by Linda Carmichael, a thin woman in her 60s with iron gray hair, and Robert Preston, a heavy-set man who looked uncomfortable in his suit jacket. There were about a dozen other residents scattered in the chairs, most of them looking bored. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m., running through routine business with the efficiency of someone who enjoyed wielding power. Budget reports, landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules. Finally, she got to new business. "We have a request from Warren Sullivan to address the board regarding his vehicle violation," she said, her tone making it clear she thought this was a waste of time. "Mr. Sullivan, you have 5 minutes." I stood up and walked to the front of the room, setting my folder on the table. "Thank you for the opportunity to address the board. I am here to contest the violation notice I received regarding my 1969 Ford F100 truck. The notice claims my vehicle is an eyesore and violates community standards. I disagree, and I have documentation to support my position." I opened the folder and pulled out the appraisal report, handing copies to each board member. This is an official appraisal completed by Marcus Chen, a certified vehicle appraiser with over 25 years of experience. As you can see, my truck has been professionally valued at $150,000. The reaction was everything I had hoped for. Linda Carmichael's mouth actually fell open. Robert Preston choked on the water he was drinking, and Patricia's face went through several colors before settling on an angry red. "That is ridiculous," Patricia said, her voice sharp. "That truck looks like it belongs in a scrapyard." "With all due respect, appearances can be deceiving," I said calmly. "This truck is a numbers-matching original owner-family vehicle with complete documentation dating back to its purchase in 1969. It is currently undergoing a professional restoration using period-correct parts. What you see as an eyesore is actually a valuable piece of automotive history." I pulled out more documentation, photos of similar trucks that had sold at auction, the original bill of sale, maintenance records. The vehicle is fully registered, insured, and operational. It is parked legally on my private property. I am not in violation of any actual bylaws. Patricia shuffled through the appraisal report, her lips pressed into a thin line. Section 12, paragraph 4 clearly states that vehicles must be maintained in presentable condition. "And my vehicle is maintained," I countered. "It is clean, functional, and valuable. The fact that it is undergoing restoration does not make it unpresentable. By that logic, you could cite anyone who is washing their car or changing their oil for having an unpresentable vehicle." Robert Preston cleared his throat. "Mr. Sullivan, I think what we are concerned about is the overall appearance. Several neighbors have complained that the truck looks old and run down." "Then perhaps those neighbors need to be educated about the difference between neglect and restoration," I said. "I am happy to provide information about the vehicle's value and historical significance to anyone who is interested. But I should not be fined for maintaining a valuable asset on my own property." Linda Carmichael spoke up for the first time. "This appraisal says $150,000. That seems quite high." I was skeptical too, I admitted. "But Marcus Chen is one of the top appraisers in the state. His valuations are used by insurance companies, auction houses, and collectors. I have also included comparable sales data showing trucks in worse condition selling for similar amounts. The market for these vehicles has grown significantly in recent years." Patricia was flipping through the documentation, clearly looking for some angle to maintain her position. "Regardless of the vehicle's supposed value, the fact remains that multiple neighbors have complained about its appearance. The HOA has a responsibility to maintain community standards. And I have a responsibility to protect my property," I said. "I have paid nearly $400 in fines under protest. I'm asking the board to rescind those fines and withdraw the violation notice. If you refuse, I'm prepared to pursue legal action for harassment and improper application of the bylaws." That got their attention. Robert Preston and Linda exchanged glances. Patricia's jaw tightened. "We will need to discuss this as a board," Patricia said stiffly. "Please wait outside while we deliberate." I gathered my materials and stepped out into the hallway. Through the door, I could hear raised voices, though I could not make out the words. The discussion went on for almost 20 minutes. Finally, the door opened and Linda Carmichael gestured for me to come back in. The board members looked tense, and Patricia looked furious. "The board has reviewed your documentation," Linda said, clearly having been elected spokesperson. "We acknowledge that your vehicle has significant value and that the violation notice may have been premature. However, we cannot simply ignore the complaints from other residents." Here it came, the compromise that was not really a compromise. "We are willing to withdraw the fines you have already paid and rescind the violation notice," Linda continued, "provided you agree to complete the restoration and paint work within 6 months. Once the vehicle has its final paint job and looks presentable, there will be no further issues." I considered this. It was not ideal, but it was reasonable. I had planned to finish the paint work within the next few months anyway. I can agree to that with the understanding that presentable does not mean perfect. Restoration is an ongoing process, and there may be periods where the vehicle is partially disassembled for work. Linda looked at Patricia, who gave a curt nod. "We can agree to that, provided any major disassembly is done in your garage and not visible from the street." "That is acceptable," I said. I want it in writing, and I want my fines refunded. We will draft an agreement and have it to you within a week, Linda said. The refund check will be issued at the same time. It was not a complete victory, but it was close enough. I'd made my point, protected my truck, and gotten my money back. As I left the meeting, several other residents stopped me to ask about the truck and express their own frustrations with the HOA's overreach. One older gentleman, Frank Morrison, was particularly interested. I have been fighting with Patricia for months about the color I painted my front door, he said. She claims it violates the approved color palette, but I checked the bylaws and there is no specific restriction. You got a name for that lawyer you mentioned? I gave him Janet Reeves's contact information and made a mental note to follow up with him later. It seemed Patricia's crusade against my truck was part of a larger pattern of overreach. The next week dragged by. I kept waiting for the written agreement and the refund check, but nothing arrived. I called the HOA office twice and got voicemail both times. My messages were not returned. On day 8, I received a different kind of letter. This one was from a law firm representing the HOA, claiming that I had disrupted the board meeting, made threats, and created a hostile environment. The letter demanded that I apologize in writing and agree to a new set of restrictions on my vehicle, including keeping it covered with a car cover at all times when not in use. I called Janet Reeves immediately. "They are trying to intimidate you," she said after I read her the letter. "This is retaliation for you standing up to them. Do not respond to this letter directly. I will handle it." Janet drafted a response that was professional but firm, pointing out that I had done nothing wrong at the meeting, that I had been within my rights to mention legal action, and that the new demands were not part of the agreement reached at the meeting. She also demanded the written agreement and refund check within 5 business days, or we would file suit. The response from the HOA's lawyer came back within 24 hours. They were declining to provide the written agreement or refund, claiming that I had violated the terms by threatening legal action. It was circular logic that would not hold up in court, and they probably knew it. "Time to file suit," Janet said. "We will go for the refund, legal fees, and damages for harassment. This kind of behavior from an HOA can constitute intentional infliction of emotional distress if we can show a pattern of conduct." I gave her the green light. She filed the lawsuit 2 days later in Maricopa County Superior Court. The complaint was comprehensive, laying out everything from the initial violation notice to the current refusal to honor the board's agreement. We also included claims for violation of Arizona's HOA statutes, which required proper notice and hearing procedures that Patricia had not followed. The lawsuit hit the HOA like a bomb. Within a week, I received a panicked call from Robert Preston. "Warren, I think we need to talk," he said. "This lawsuit, it's getting out of hand. The HOA's insurance company is involved now, and they are not happy." "You should have thought about that before Patricia decided to go after my truck," I said. "I tried to resolve this reasonably." I know. Look, Linda and we were not comfortable with how Patricia handled this from the beginning. She pushed us into voting for the violation notice, but this whole thing is blown up, and our insurance premiums are going to skyrocket if this goes to trial." "What are you proposing?" "Can we meet? Off the record, just to talk? Maybe there is a way to resolve this without the lawyers." I agreed to meet him for coffee the next day. Janet advised me to hear him out, but not to agree to anything without running it past her first. Robert showed up at the coffee shop looking stressed and tired. He ordered a large black coffee and sat down across from me with a heavy sigh. "Patricia is stepping down," he said without preamble. "The insurance company demanded it. They reviewed the case and basically said she created this mess through improper procedures and personal vendetta. They are threatening to deny coverage if she stays on the board." That was news. "When?" "Her resignation is effective end of this month. Linda is taking over as president temporarily until we can hold elections. But here's the thing, Warren. We need this lawsuit to go away. The insurance company is willing to settle, but we need it done quickly and quietly." "I am listening." "Full refund of the fines, plus $2,000 for your trouble and legal fees. Written agreement that your truck is exempt from any vehicle restrictions as long as it remains registered and operational. And a formal apology from the board. It was a good offer, better than I had expected. $3,000 for legal fees and trouble, and I want the exemption to include any future vehicles I own, not just the truck. I restore classic cars as a hobby. I do not want to go through this again in 5 years with a different vehicle. Robert thought about it, then nodded. I can get that approved. Give me until tomorrow to run it past Linda and the insurance company. He called me the next afternoon with confirmation. Janet reviewed the settlement agreement and gave it her blessing. We signed the papers a week later, and I deposited a check for $3,000 along with my refund of $350. Patricia Henderson's resignation was announced in the next HOA newsletter, buried in a paragraph about board transitions. There was no mention of the lawsuit or the reason for her departure. I figured that was for the best. She had learned her lesson, and the neighborhood could move on, but Patricia was not quite done. About 2 weeks after the settlement was finalized, I came home to find my truck's passenger side keyed, a long, deep scratch running from the front fender all the way back to the tailgate. The scratch went through the primer down to bare metal, and someone had tried to make it look random, but the deliberate nature was obvious. I called the police and filed a report, then called Marcus to come document the damage for insurance purposes. The scratch would require significant work to repair, stripping, and repainting the entire side of the truck. "This is going to add months to your restoration," Marcus said grimly as he photographed the damage, "and at least $5,000 in proper repair costs." The police officer who took my report was sympathetic but realistic. "Without witnesses or camera footage, there's not much we can do. You said you suspect it might be related to an HOA dispute?" I explained the situation with Patricia. The officer made notes, but told me what I already knew. Proving who did it would be nearly impossible unless someone came forward or there was video evidence. "You might want to install some security cameras," he suggested. "These neighborhood disputes can escalate, and it is better to have documentation if something else happens." I took his advice. That weekend, I installed a comprehensive security camera system covering my driveway, front yard, and both sides of the house. The cameras were high definition with night vision and motion detection, feeding to a cloud storage system. If someone messed with my property again, I would have proof. 2 nights later, the cameras caught someone. At 2:30 in the morning, a figure in dark clothing and a baseball cap approached my truck, carrying what looked like a paint can. The motion detection triggered, and the cameras started recording in high definition. I watched from my bedroom window as the person stopped next to my truck, set down the can, and pulled out what looked like a screwdriver. They were about to stab my tire when I flipped on every exterior light I had and stepped out onto the porch. "I've already called the police," I shouted, "and I have you on camera." The figure froze, then turned and ran. They made it about halfway down the street before a patrol car turned the corner, lights flashing. I had indeed called the police the moment the motion alert woke me up. The police caught the person 3 blocks away, out of breath and still carrying the screwdriver and a can of spray paint. When they pulled off the baseball cap, I was not entirely surprised to see Patricia Henderson's face, red and sweating and furious. She tried to claim she was just out for a late-night walk and the screwdriver and paint were for a home project, but the police were not buying it, especially not when I showed them the camera footage of her approaching my truck with clear intent to vandalize it. They arrested her on the spot for criminal trespassing and attempted criminal damage. As they put her in the patrol car, she was screaming about how I had ruined her life and how my truck was destroying the neighborhood's property values. The officers just shook their heads. I gave my statement and handed over copies of the camera footage. The officer in charge, Sergeant Davis, looked tired but satisfied. "This should be pretty straightforward," he said. "Clear video evidence, caught with the tools, prior history of dispute. The DA will probably offer a plea deal, but she's looking at probation at minimum, maybe some jail time if she has priors or if the judge wants to make an example." "What about the damage she already did?" I asked. "The keyed paint job?" "That is trickier without direct evidence, but you can mention it to the DA. If she admits to it as part of a plea deal, you can pursue restitution through the criminal case instead of having to file a separate civil suit." The whole incident made the local news. "Former HOA president arrested for vandalism" ran as a headline in the Phoenix New-Times, complete with Patricia's booking photo and a summary of our dispute. The story mentioned the truck's appraised value, which prompted a flood of messages from other classic car enthusiasts wanting to see it. The HOA board, now led by Linda Carmichael, sent me a formal letter apologizing for Patricia's actions and assuring me that the board did not condone her behavior. They also offered to pay for the damage to my truck as a gesture of goodwill, which I accepted. Between the HOA's payment and my insurance claim, I actually came out slightly ahead. Patricia's case went exactly as Sergeant Davis predicted. The DA offered her a plea deal. Plead guilty to attempted criminal damage, admit to the previous keying incident, pay full restitution, and accept 2 years of probation plus 100 hours of community service. The alternative was going to trial with video evidence that would almost certainly result in conviction and possible jail time. She took the deal. I received a check for $7,000 in restitution, covering the cost of repairing the key damage and adding a little extra for the hassle. Patricia was also required to stay at least 500 feet away from my property as part of her probation conditions. The community service requirement turned out to be the real punishment. The judge assigned her to work with a local nonprofit that helped low-income families with home repairs. She spent her weekends patching roofs and painting houses for people who could barely afford to keep their homes. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that the experience was humbling for her, though I never saw her to confirm it myself. With the legal drama finally resolved, I turned my attention back to my truck. The restoration had been delayed by months, but now I had the funds to do it right. I hired a professional body shop that specialized in classic vehicles to handle the paint work, choosing to have them restore the truck to its original Wimbledon white paint scheme. The process took 4 months. They stripped the entire truck down to bare metal, repaired every tiny imperfection, and applied multiple coats of modern paint using the original color formula. The chrome trim was either restored or replaced with new old stock parts I had been collecting for years. The interior was reupholstered in the original red and white vinyl pattern. When they were done, the truck looked like it had just rolled off the assembly line in 1969. Marcus came by the day I picked it up from the shop, shaking his head in admiration. "Warren, this is museum quality. I'm serious. You could put this in a car show and win awards." "Maybe I will," I said, "but mostly I'm just going to drive it." And I did. Every weekend I took the truck out, driving through Phoenix and the surrounding areas, enjoying the rumble of the V8 and the attention it drew. Other classic car enthusiasts would flag me down at gas stations to ask about it. People pulled out their phones to take pictures at red lights. Kids pointed and waved. The best moment came about 6 months after the restoration was complete. I was driving through my neighborhood when I passed Frank Morrison, the guy who had asked me about my lawyer at the HOA meeting. He was outside working on his front door, which was painted a beautiful navy blue that definitely was not on any HOA-approved color list. He waved me down and I pulled over. "That's the truck that started the war?" he asked, walking around it admiringly. "That's her," I said. "Worth every penny of the fight," Frank said. "By the way, I took your advice and hired Janet Reeves. She helped me push back on the HOA's color restrictions. Turns out they were trying to enforce rules that were never properly voted on by the membership. Once we threatened legal action, they backed down completely." "Glad I could help," I said. "You did more than help. You showed everyone in this neighborhood that the HOA is not untouchable. Linda is doing a much better job as president, actually listening to homeowners instead of dictating to them. Patricia's little reign of terror was the best thing that could have happened, in a weird way. It woke people up." I had not thought about it that way, but Frank was right. The HOA meetings now had much better attendance, with homeowners actually engaged in the process instead of letting a few power-hungry board members run the show. New elections had brought in board members who were more focused on maintaining common areas and handling actual problems rather than manufacturing violations to justify their authority. My truck became something of a neighborhood icon. Kids asked their parents if they could come look at it when I was washing it in the driveway. Teenagers wanted pictures with it for their social media. Even some of the neighbors who had initially complained about its appearance stopped by to apologize and admit they had not understood what they were looking at. One of those neighbors was a woman named Carol Jenkins, who lived 3 houses down. She knocked on my door on a Saturday morning about a year after the whole Patricia situation had resolved. "Mr. Sullivan, I owe you an apology," she said when I answered. "I was one of the people who complained to Patricia about your truck. I thought it was just an old beater that made the neighborhood look bad." I did not understand that it was a restoration project or that it had value. I am sorry for causing you trouble. I appreciate that, I said. No hard feelings. It is easy to jump to conclusions. My grandson is really into old cars, she continued. He is 16, just got his license. Would you ever consider letting him see the truck up close? I think it would make his whole year. I invited them over the next weekend. Carol's grandson, Tyler, showed up with a notebook full of questions about classic vehicles and restoration techniques. We spent 2 hours going over every detail of the truck, and I could see the passion in his eyes. It reminded me of myself at that age, learning about cars from my grandfather. Before they left, I gave Tyler some of the original documentation my grandfather had saved, things like the window sticker and the first oil change receipt. You hang on to these, I told him. When you start your own restoration project, you will understand how valuable this kind of history is. Tyler's face lit up like Christmas morning. Carol had tears in her eyes as they thanked me and left. That interaction got me thinking. I'd been so focused on the conflict with Patricia and protecting my truck that I had not considered the educational value it could have. Classic vehicles were becoming rarer, and the knowledge of how to maintain and restore them was dying out as older generations passed on. I was sitting on both a valuable truck and valuable knowledge. Maybe it was time to share both. I started taking the truck to local car shows, not to compete, but to educate. I would park it with the hood open and spend the day talking to people about automotive history, restoration techniques, and the value of preserving these machines. I met other enthusiasts, swapped stories, and learned new techniques that I could apply to future projects. One show connected me with a local high school that had an automotive shop class. The teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, was struggling to engage students who were more interested in modern tuner cars than the basics of engine maintenance. These kids think they can just plug a laptop in and tune everything, he said. They do not understand the fundamentals of how an engine actually works. I offered to bring my truck to the school and do a presentation. Mr. Rodriguez jumped at the idea. The next month, I drove the F100 to the high school and spent 2 hours with his automotive class, explaining how the engine worked, showing them the simplicity and elegance of the original design, and talking about the restoration process. The students were skeptical at first, but once I popped the hood and started pointing out components, I had their attention. One kid, a junior named Marcus, no relation to my Appraiser friend, was particularly interested in the carburetor system. "So there is no computer at all?" he asked. "It is all mechanical?" "Completely mechanical," I confirmed. "Fuel, air, spark, timing. That is it. And if something breaks, you can fix it with basic hand tools and some knowledge. No diagnostic software required." "That's kind of cool," Marcus admitted. "Like, if the world ended, this truck would still run." "Exactly," I said. "Modern vehicles are more efficient and powerful, but these old trucks are reliable and repairable in a way that a lot of newer vehicles are not." Mr. Rodriguez asked if I would be willing to come back periodically to work with students on hands-on projects. I agreed, and it became a regular thing. Once a month, I would spend a Saturday at the school helping students learn basic maintenance on older vehicles. The school had acquired a few project cars over the years, and we worked on bringing them back to life. The experience was rewarding in ways I had not anticipated. These kids were hungry to learn. They just needed someone to meet them where they were and show them why it mattered. Several of the students ended up pursuing careers in automotive technology, and a couple specifically mentioned that working on the old vehicles had sparked their interest. My son Derek, who was 23 and working as a software engineer in Seattle, came home for Thanksgiving that year. When he saw the fully restored truck sitting in the driveway, he just stopped and stared. "Dad, this is incredible," he said, walking around it slowly. "I remember when Grandpa had it, but it did not look like this." "That is what 3 years of work and a small fortune in parts will do," I said. "Want to go for a drive?" We spent the afternoon cruising around Phoenix, and I told him the whole story of the HOA fight, Patricia's arrest, and everything that had followed. Derek listened with increasing amazement. "So you were telling me that the HOA tried to make you get rid of a truck worth $150,000 because they thought it was ugly?" he asked. "That about sums it up. And the woman who started it ended up getting arrested trying to vandalize it." "Yep." Derek laughed. That is the most Phoenix thing I've ever heard. Did she ever apologize? Not directly. Her lawyer apologized on her behalf as part of the settlement, but I never heard from her personally. I think she was too embarrassed. She should be embarrassed. She sounds like a nightmare. She was, I agreed. But in a weird way, the whole situation worked out. I got the truck restored. I started working with students, and the HOA is much better run now. Sometimes the worst experiences lead to the best outcomes. Derek was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know this truck is mine someday, right? Like, you have told me that since I was a kid." I remember. "I'm going to keep it," he said. "I do not care what it is worth. When the time comes, I am going to keep it and maintain it just like you and Grandpa did. Maybe pass it down to my kids if I have them." That was all I needed to hear. The truck had survived Patricia's vendetta, been restored to its former glory, and would continue on in the family. The whole point of the fight had been to protect that legacy, and I had succeeded. The rest of that year passed quietly. The HOA left me alone, my truck garnered awards at several car shows, and my work with the high school automotive program expanded to include other local schools. I even started a small side business doing classic car appraisals and restoration consulting, leveraging everything I had learned over the years. Patricia Henderson moved out of the neighborhood about 18 months after her arrest. I heard she relocated to Tucson to be closer to her daughter. I never saw her again, and I was fine with that. Some people never learn, and some battles are not worth refighting. Linda Carmichael served out the rest of Patricia's term as HOA president and then declined to run for re-election. The new board was a mix of younger homeowners and longtime residents who were committed to actually following the bylaws and treating homeowners fairly. The neighborhood became a more pleasant place to live, with less arbitrary enforcement and more focus on genuine community building. Frank Morrison and I became good friends, bonding over our shared experience of standing up to HOA overreach. He was a retired aerospace engineer with fascinating stories about working on early satellite programs. We would sit on my porch in the evenings, drinking beer and talking about everything from vintage cars to space exploration. One evening, about 2 years after the initial violation notice, Frank asked me if I had ever considered what would have happened if I had just complied with Patricia's demand. All the time, I admitted. If I had moved the truck or sold it, I would have regretted it for the rest of my life. That truck is not just metal and rubber. It is my connection to my grandfather, my father, and now my son. It is family history. But you also would have avoided a lot of stress and legal fees, Frank pointed out. True, but I would have lost something more important than money or peace of mind. I would have lost my self-respect. Patricia was wrong. The HOA was wrong. And giving in to them would have set a precedent that they could bully anyone into compliance. Sometimes you have to fight, even when it is expensive and stressful. Frank raised his beer. To fighting the good fight. I clinked my bottle against his. To fighting the good fight. The truck sits in my driveway now, gleaming white with perfect chrome, a testament to 3 generations of ownership and care. Every time I see it, I remember the battle it took to protect it, and I am grateful I stood my ground. Patricia Henderson thought she could intimidate me into giving up something precious because it did not fit her vision of suburban perfection. She learned the hard way that you cannot judge value by appearance, and you definitely cannot bully people into surrendering their heritage. The appraised value has continued to climb. Marcus re-evaluated it last year at $175,000, and he thinks it will keep appreciating as these trucks become rarer. But I will never sell it. Some things are worth more than money. My work with the automotive programs expanded to include a summer workshop where students can work on their own project vehicles with guidance from experienced mechanics and restorers. We have had kids bring in everything from old motorcycles to classic muscle cars, learning the skills and discipline that come with proper restoration. Several of those students have told me that the experience changed their lives, giving them confidence and direction they had been missing. Tyler, Carol Jenkins's grandson, became one of my regular students. He is working on restoring a 1972 Chevrolet C10 pickup that he bought with money from his first job. Every weekend, he is in my garage or at the school workshop, learning and applying techniques. Watching him work reminds me so much of myself at that age, and I like to think my grandfather would be proud to see the tradition continuing. The legal precedent from my case with the HOA actually helped other homeowners in the area. Janet Reeves used the settlement agreement as a template for negotiating similar disputes in other neighborhoods. Several HOAs in the Phoenix metro area revised their vehicle policies to be more specific and less subjective after seeing what happened with Patricia's overreach. I still drive the truck regularly, refusing to let it become a garage queen that only comes out for special occasions. My grandfather drove it to work every day for 40 years. My father used it to haul building materials and take family camping trips. I drive it to car shows, to the grocery store, and anywhere else I need to go. It is a truck, meant to be used and enjoyed, not locked away like a museum piece. The neighborhood has changed too. More young families have moved in, bringing energy and new perspectives. The HOA has become less about enforcement and more about organizing community events and maintaining common areas. There's a new spirit of cooperation that was completely absent during Patricia's brief tenure. Last month, the HOA actually asked if I would bring my truck to the neighborhood block party. They wanted it as a centerpiece, something for people to gather around and admire. I agreed and spent the afternoon watching kids climb into the cab for photos while their parents asked questions about the restoration. It was surreal, considering 3 years earlier, the same organization had been trying to find me into getting rid of it. As I write this, the truck is parked in my driveway exactly where it was when Patricia first came marching up with her clipboard and her demands. The difference is that now everyone in the neighborhood knows its value, both monetary and sentimental. They understand that what looks like an eyesore to one person might be a treasure to another, and that appearances can be deceiving. The whole experience taught me lessons that extend far beyond classic cars and HOA disputes. It taught me about standing up for what matters, even when the opposition seems overwhelming. It taught me about the importance of documentation and proper legal process. It taught me that bullies, whether in a schoolyard or on an HOA board, back down when confronted with facts and determination. And it taught me that sometimes the worst conflicts can lead to the best outcomes if you handle them correctly. Patricia Henderson probably still thinks she was right, that her crusade to remove my truck was justified by her vision of neighborhood perfection. But she learned that personal opinions do not override property rights, and that underestimating someone based on appearances is a costly mistake. Her legacy in the neighborhood is not the improvements she claimed to champion, but rather the cautionary tale of what happens when petty authority goes unchecked. My legacy, I hope, will be the truck itself, and the knowledge I have been able to pass on to the next generation. Every kid who learns to change oil on a classic engine, every student who discovers the satisfaction of bringing a neglected vehicle back to life, every homeowner who stands up to unjust HOA demands because they saw that it could be done successfully carries forward something important. The appraiser valued my truck at $150,000, but its real value cannot be measured in money. It is worth the memories of my grandfather teaching me to drive a manual transmission in an empty parking lot. It is worth the pride on my father's face when he handed me the keys and told me to take care of it. It is worth the look in my son's eyes when he said he would keep it and pass it down to his own children someday. It is worth the students who found their passion working on old vehicles. And yes, it is worth the fight I had to wage to protect it. As I sit here on my porch, looking at that beautiful white truck gleaming in the Arizona sun, I feel nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the grandfather who bought it new and maintained it so carefully. Gratitude for the father who continued that tradition. Gratitude for the appraiser who documented its true value. Gratitude for the lawyer who helped me fight back. Gratitude for the neighbors who supported me. And even in a strange way, gratitude for Patricia Henderson, whose overreach forced me to defend something I had taken for granted and ultimately led to so many positive outcomes. The truck will stay in my driveway, right where it belongs, for as long as I live here. And when the time comes to pass it to Derek, it will be with the same pride and sense of continuity that my father felt when he passed it to me. That is what family legacy looks like. Not a piece of paper with a dollar amount on it, but a physical connection to the past that extends into the future, maintained and protected by people who understand its true value. Patricia called it an eyesore. The appraiser called it $150,000. I call it home, history, and family. And no HOA, no matter how petty or determined, was ever going to take that away from me.